Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, was this foretold over 2,000 years ago? We're going to talk about several developments today that I believe were foretold 2,000 and over 2,000 years ago in the Bible. We're going to talk about recent events and developments that have taken place regarding the European Union and how they relate to Bible prophecy and how they bring us one step closer, I believe, to the tribulation period. So what am I talking about? We're going to start with this right here. This is an article from Prophecy Newswatch. It's titled Elimination of Nation-State Veto Takes the European Union Closer to the United States of Europe. It says, in what may be the beginning of the end for European nations, Germany and France are determined to reform national rights, including the EU right of veto, later this year. The debate has caused a stir in recent months, and in recent weeks, the measure has been put back on the agenda. France and Germany are convinced that a large-scale institutional reform of the European Union, including the abolition of the veto on European Council votes, could be achieved this year. This is one of the options we want to explore in order to maintain our position as a global player with the EU's common foreign and security policy, German Minister of State Anna Lerman said. He added, it would be an important signal in other policy areas if we were to move to qualified majority voting already this year, and expressed confidence that this would happen. The two ministers said that both countries consider it important to abolish unanimous voting in the European Council in areas such as foreign policy and taxation before the enlargement of the European Union. This could mean, for example, that Brussels would be able to implement a flat tax rate across the European Union, or even involve itself more deeply in the war, both moves that Hungary has rejected, and in some cases even deployed its veto to stop. Paris and Berlin claim abolishing the veto is a change that is possible without amending the EU treaties, a point hotly contested by a number of European parties, as it would not only give Brussels enormous power, but also the largest states, such as Germany and France. This would subsequently allow for the EU to enact a liberal immigration policy, green rules, and various other progressive goals without any hindrance from Hungary and other smaller conservative nations. The introduction of qualified majority voting would remove the veto on foreign policy issues, which would mean that only 15 of the 27 member states, representing 65% of the EU's population, would have to agree to make particularly important foreign and defense policy decisions affecting the EU as a whole. Lawrence Boone told Euractiv that this would be an important step toward greater integration and efficiency. However, the nature of such a system would favor countries with larger populations, such as France or Germany, while smaller states, such as Hungary, would lose the opportunity to have a say in EU decision-making. Abolishing the principle of unanimity in those areas where it still exists for votes in the European Council would be tantamount to taking away the sovereignty of Poland and other smaller states. And that's exactly what it would do, guys. It would take away the sovereignty, and you would create a United States of Europe. If you're talking about a unified tax policy that comes from Brussels instead of the individual nation states, if you're talking about a unified foreign policy, that's exactly what you're talking about. If you're talking about these nations don't have veto power, the question would be, would they be able to leave as the UK did, or would that be against the rules? Would this is going to lead to, in all likelihood, a complete loss of sovereignty and the creation of a real European superstate beyond just the bureaucratic superstate we've known as the European Union for the past couple of decades or so. This would be a true United States of Europe. And we're going to look at another story in a minute that shows how we're getting even closer to that. So this goes on. It says, Herbert Kickl, president of the Austrian Freedom Party, currently the most popular party in Austria, believes that Brussels' aim is to create a centralist superstate in which member states increasingly lose their importance and self-determination. They want to take more and more powers away from the nation states and transfer them to Brussels to create a United States of Europe over the heads of its citizens, says Kickl. Former president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has suggested Europe transform itself into what he called a superpower that could act as a global security power. He went on to say, the Americans, to whom we owe much, will not ensure the security of the Europeans in the long term. We have to do this ourselves, and the only way forward is to combine our forces and strengthen not only our capacity, but also our will to act. French leader Emmanuel Macron has long championed a greater European political community and has been calling for a true European army since he took power. Armin Laschet of Germany said recently that Europe must be strengthened, quote, such that we never have to leave it up to Americans. And guys, no doubt there's a strong push for this. And especially if we see Ukraine fall, if NATO fails to kick Russia out of Ukraine, which I believe is very likely, we could see a complete breakup of NATO. We could see, as we talked about last week, we could see the United States financial system and a meltdown, the ability of the United States to project its power on a global scale go away. If that happens, and the United States can no longer be relied on to provide defense for the European continent, then the EU will have no choice but to develop its own security apparatus, its own army, and further integrate, which is what these people have been pushing for. But guys, there's more developments. There's also this one right here. This is from Zero Hedge. It says, German central bank may need bailout after European central bank bond scheme losses. I think this has really gone under the radar and missed by a lot of people. I think this is extremely important. Let's read what it says. It says, less than a year after the UK had to pull the plug on a $13.9 billion hole to cover projected losses in the Bank of England's bond buying program, Germany's Federal Audit Office has warned that the Bundesbank may need a bailout to cover losses incurred from the European Central Bank's bond buying scheme, potentially compromising the ECB's plans to conduct similar operations in the future. The possible Bundesbank losses are substantial and could necessitate a recapitalization of the bank with budgetary funds, reads a report by the Audit Office. I can't read that. I don't speak German, guys. The Bundesreichswirtschaft. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Sorry for those of you watching in Germany. Says which the Financial Times has seen. It says purchasing vast amounts of bonds to lower borrowing costs, known as quantitative easing, has long been controversial in Germany. The Bundesbank argued that in 2015, when the Eurozone's central bank launched its bond buying, but it was outvoted at the ECB. The Audit Office's criticisms are likely to make a repeat of the policy more difficult, especially as some economists blame the QE for stoking the recent wave of inflation. The Bundesbank announced in March that it had suffered a €1 billion hit from its bond holdings as it grappled with the impact of higher interest rates. It also warned that future losses would wipe out its remaining financial buffers, though it denied it would need a government rescue. So there you go, guys. We have an official government denial. They've officially denied that they will need a government rescue. And what does that mean? Well, it means in very short order, we will see that the Bundesbank needs a government rescue because we have the official government denial. But what's happening here is the same thing that we've seen happen in United States banks. When interest rates are rising, that means that bond prices go down. So these banks are sitting on a pile of bonds that were purchased when interest rates were low, and now the value of those has gone down. That's the same thing that's happened here with Germany's national bank. And let's see what else it has to say here. It says the report blames the European Central Bank's public sector purchase program launched in 2015 for the turmoil after the bank purchased 2.7 trillion euros of sovereign bonds from Eurozone countries. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they just created 2.7 trillion euros out of thin air, just ran the printing press, and then went out and bought the debt that all these countries had, debt in Greece and debt in Portugal and debt in Spain and Italy. Because if they hadn't have done that, then those nations would have gone bankrupt and the whole European experiment would have come to an end. It says the Bundesbank also bought a devilish 666 billion euros of German government debt under the program, which was buying bonds up until last year. Then it says the Bundesbank is now under pressure due to the growing gap between its bond income and the interest it pays to commercial banks on their deposits. So what does that mean? It means the Bundesbank is bankrupt. And they can use all these fancy terms. They can talk about quantitative easing and bond prices and interest rates and whether their dividends can pay here and there and whatever they want. They are bankrupt. And this is very significant because if you recall, if you've been following the European Union for some time, you'll know that a decade ago, I think it's around 2011, between the 2010 to 2012 timeframe, we had the Greek debt crisis. We had crises brewing, the interest rates spiking on government debt for a number of Southern European nations. And there were calls for the centralized fiscal union of the European Union. So they would have common fiscal policy as well as monetary policy, meaning that taxation, spending power would go to Brussels and move away from these individual nations. They would have common labor laws and standards. And all of that got vetoed by Germany, who said, no, we're prosperous. We've done the right things in our nation, and so we're not going to pay for the mistakes of these other countries. So they were the impediment. They were the obstacle to this fiscal union. Well, now they're bankrupt. Now, why is that? Well, there's a whole host of reasons that they just discussed in this article, but we also have to take into account the loss of cheap Russian energy coming through Nord Stream pipeline and the deindustrialization of Europe, and particularly Germany, has put Germany in a precarious position. So what does this mean? Well, we read down toward the bottom of the story, and it says, and we're going to unpack this because, again, they use this fancy language that probably isn't necessary, but it says that the functioning of the Bundesbank is endangered by an inadequate or even negative net equity. The Federal Republic of Germany can be obligated to inject capital. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means that the bank goes bankrupt. Germany has to bail it out. But there's a problem here. We've encountered these bailouts in the past in the United States where, a bank will go bankrupt and the Federal Reserve just comes to the rescue and bails it out. Well, how did they do that? Well, they just print dollars. And how can they do that? Well, because they are the ones that print the dollars, right? So, but here's the problem. The Federal Reserve is the world's monopoly supplier of US dollars. Nobody else can legally create US dollars. And they can create an unlimited supply of those dollars. What's the problem here? Well, the Bundesbank, their debt is denominated in euros, and Germany is not the world's monopoly supplier of euros. In fact, they aren't a supplier of euros at all. Euros come from the European Central Bank. So if they want that bailout without having massive taxes put on the German people, they're going to be turning to the European Central Bank. So let's read on. It says, depending on the extent and probability, the The risk arising from monetary policy could, in the worst case, endanger the budgetary autonomy of the German Bundestag. In other words, Germany could lose its sovereignty. They could be going hat in hand to the European Central Bank, to Brussels, and that obstacle to European fiscal union would go away. And couple that with what we just talked about with this push to end the veto power among your EU nations, and this move for a common taxation policy, a common foreign policy. And what we're looking at is greater integration of the European Union and loss of sovereignty for many of these individual nation states, even as they remain unique in many ways. But Germany isn't the only one losing their sovereignty or on the cusp of losing it, nor is Poland or Hungary, all these other nation states we talked about so far. We also had to worry about the UK, a nation that thought it had escaped the orb of the European Union. Here we have this commentary in The Guardian by Jonathan Friedland. It says, with even leavers regretting Brexit, there's one path back to rejoining the EU. It says that it seems only a matter of time before we reverse this national act of self-harm. So that's his belief, is this was an act of self-harm. So many people thought, well, that's the end of the European Union when the UK left in 2016 and voted in that referendum to leave. But as we see, there are other people who have never given up in their belief that that would be reversed. And so here we see a picture of people advocating for that very thing, to rejoin the European Union. So here we go. Jonathan Friedland says, let Nigel Farage be our inspiration. Let John Redwood be our role model. Not the way they would want, revered as the founding fathers of Brexit, toasted on this day every year as the men who led us to glorious independence from the hated empire of Brussels. Of course not that. On the contrary, June 23rd, 2016 is a milestone in our national story that evokes sadness and regret rather than celebration, according to him. He says, we don't need to rehearse on this 7th anniversary all the ways in which Brexit has disappointed even those who voted for it. Farage and Redwood, along with Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and the rest promised to increase prosperity, cheaper food, flourishing trade, and a flush NHS. They said we'd be free of all that tedious European red tape and would take back control of our borders, encouraging anyone agitated by immigration to believe that fewer people would come in. There would be no downside, only upsides. As David Davis pledged soon after the vote, our exit deal would deliver the exact same benefits as EU membership. Look around to see how all that turned out. Again, this is Jonathan Friedland speaking, not me. I don't think that the things he's about to outline have anything to do with whether or not the UK is a member of the EU. But this is what he says. He says, the country is in the grip of a cost of living crisis. Food prices are rocketing. Trade is either down or static, while it's surged for our EU neighbors, and the NHS is ailing. Post-Brexit red tape is strangling thousands of small businesses, whether traveling musicians or exporters of goods, tying them up in daunting forms or extra charges that cost time and money they don't have. Those who thought legal migration of 330,000 people a year was too much when they voted in 2016 now contemplate an annual figure nearly twice as high, 606,000. As for the terms of our exit, ask anyone who buys from, sells, or is stuck in a queue to visit the continent if we enjoy the exact same benefits we once did. These are not Remainer facts. They are facts understood and absorbed by a growing majority of the British people, including a good chunk of those who voted to leave. As the polling guru John Curtice notes, just 33% of Britons now believe the 2016 decision was the right one, while 55% say it was wrong. More striking still, as many as 59% said they would vote to rejoin the EU if given the chance, with just 41% preferring to stay out. So think about that for a moment, guys. 59% of UK citizens, if this poll is to be believed, would vote to rejoin the EU if a referendum were held today. So we're going to talk about how that, I believe that plays directly into Bible prophecy, and we're going to talk about why in just a moment. But I want to go down just a little bit more. He talks about where they go from here, but I think he says something very relevant right here. He says if they do entertain talk of UK readmission, meaning the EU, it won't be on the same terms as before. The UK had a sweetheart deal, including a hefty cash rebate, an opt-out on the euro, and much more, that the 27 nations in the EU will be reluctant to offer again. Any future referendum is likely to be on a package less appealing than the one Britons cast aside in 2016. So guys, here we have this talk of the UK possibly rejoining the EU. And this reminds me of something, and I hope it reminds you of something too. What it reminds me of is this right here from the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 41 through 43. Here we have Daniel with divine revelation from God telling Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was about and what it means. And he was talking about this final world empire that would emerge, a world empire that would only be destroyed by a rock supernaturally cut from a mountain that would come and create this eternal kingdom. They were talking about Jesus Christ there. But in describing this kingdom, he said these things. He said, the feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that this kingdom will be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some of the strength of iron. But while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be as weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. So guys, this, I believe, you can call it coincidence if you want, and it is speculation on my part to say that this is a description of what we see in the EU today. Whether or not the EU turns out to be that kingdom or not, what we just read is a description of what we see. We see nations trying to band together, strong nations, weak nations, trying to increase their collective power by merging together in an alliance. It's a volatile alliance. It struggles to hold together. I mean, what we see the UK leave, and now there's talk that it may come back again. If that happens, that is exactly what you would expect to see from the kingdom that Daniel describes here. And so what is this kingdom that he describes? Well, he describes this one. This is from Daniel chapter 7:23. It says, this fourth beast is the fourth world power that will rule the earth. It will be different from all the others. It will devour the whole world, trampling and crushing everything in its path. So the kingdom, this final world empire that Daniel was talking about that would be volatile, that would be like a mixture of iron and clay, is the Antichrist kingdom that will dominate the entire globe, the entire earth in the tribulation period. And it will only be destroyed by the supernatural power of Jesus Christ himself. So guys, this will be an all-encompassing global empire. We see in the European Union, through the stories we just read, the same description of what it is. So is this a massive coincidence? Maybe it is, but I tend to believe that it means the European Union either is or is the forerunner of this final world empire. That's my belief. What do you believe? Leave your comments below. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is the European Union going to be the entity that leads to the rise of the Antichrist and the establishment of this global empire? I believe all the signs indicate that it will be, based on what we just read. Because if these things were happening in and of themselves and nothing else was happening, I would say, well, this is interesting. It could be a coincidence, but we're seeing all of this happen. And remember, years ago, decades ago, centuries ago, people said, on the ashes of the ancient Roman Empire, we will see this revived Roman Empire in the geographical area of Western Europe. We will see these nation states come together, and we've seen that happen in the aftermath of World War II. We've seen, starting with the European community and building itself up into what we know today as the European Union. And this isn't happening alone. It's happening with the backdrop of the reestablishment of Israel as a nation state, the Jewish people flooding back into the land of Israel, the Jewish people taking control of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, once again, the gospel being spread to the ends of the earth. All of the things that we've talked about, the formation of the Gog of Magog alliance, an alliance that has never existed in human history, foretold 2,600 years ago. And today we see that alliance coming together. We see the mark of the beast system being set up. We see the technology being put in place for the fulfillment of that, for the fulfillment of Revelation 11. So what we're seeing is the stage, the world stage, being set for the tribulation to play out. And I believe the European Union plays an important role in that as the Antichrist kingdom that will dominate the globe. And some may say, well, it doesn't look like they're going to do that now. It looks like they're the weakest power on earth. We have the rise of Russia and China on one side. We have the United States has this massive military on the other side. But guys, a lot of things could play out. We have all sorts of issues in China with a bursting property bubble, an aging population, a declining population. We know that Russia will be destroyed as part of the Gog of Magog alliance outlined in Ezekiel 38 and 39, so they won't survive till the end as a superpower. The United States is on the verge of economic collapse. I believe the rapture will finish the United States as a global superpower. It leaves the EU. How could they put together this army that could dominate the globe? Well, we've been over that in the past, using artificial intelligence, quantum computing, molecular manufacturing. Even one of the smallest nations in the world, Singapore, if it had those advanced technologies, could build an army, a drone swarm army that would conquer the globe in short order. It won't take long once those technologies come to fruition and are rolled out on the battlefield. So there is a very clear pathway for the European Union to be this final world empire. And I think that's what we're witnessing. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. Let us know what you think. Make sure to like and share this, and God willing, I will see you on Monday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.